Brian, you're muted.
Good afternoon. I'm Councilman Brian Haynes, and I'd like to welcome you to the June 25th Public Safety Committee meeting. All council members and staff are participating virtually. We appreciate your patience as we work through holding these committee meetings a bit differently. To help our audience follow along, I'll state each section of the agenda aloud. We are streaming live on our Virtual Engagement Hub, which is accessible through the Virtual Engagement Hub link on the front page of the city website. We also have an option for the public to listen live by phone by dialing 855-925-2801 and entering the code 9483. For those of you out there with us today, welcome. For today's meeting, we have the option for people to call in and comment live during the meeting. To call in and comment live, use the same number, 855-925-2801, meeting code 9483. Your phone will be muted and you will hear the meeting live. At this point, callers will hear, for more options, please press star. Pressing star will allow callers to continue to listen live and join a speaker queue. Callers should only join the speaker queue during the time at the end of the agenda for public comment. If you're watching the meeting through the live stream while you're listening to the meeting by phone, please be sure to turn down the volume on your device. I will now go through and introduce all the committee members and staff who are participating virtually. Please make sure to mute your microphone if you are not speaking. When you would like to speak, unmute your microphone. Please remember to mute your microphone after speaking. Council and staff, as I call your name, please say a quick hello. Vice Mayor Gwen Whistler.
Good afternoon.
Councilwoman Shanika Smith.
Hello.
City Manager Deborah Campbell.
Good afternoon.
City Attorney Brad Branham.
Hello, everyone.
APD Chief David Zack.
The chief says hello. He is in the room, but off of the computer now.
Okay. So we'll go to approval of minutes. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. We will roll call vote to approve the motion and second. When I say your name, please say aye to approve the minutes. Vice Mayor Whistler.
Aye.
Councilwoman Smith.
Aye.
Myself, aye. Minutes have been approved. Update on analysis of police response to protest is up next. Next, we have an update from City Attorney Brad Branham on the independent analysis of police response to the recent protest.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all the other committee members. As you said, my name is Brad Branham, Asheville City Attorney, and I'm here to provide the committee with an update on the investigative analysis of the police response to the recent protest here in Asheville. Now, as many of you know, we arrived at this point after protest, which started in late May of this year and continued into the month of June. Several protests were sparked by nationwide concerns regarding police brutality, systematic and institutional racism throughout the country, as well as the unjustified killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis. In response to these protests, the Asheville Police Department responded, and in that response, there were several uses of force. Along with APD, local law enforcement agencies assisted in that response, as well as the National Guard. In conjunction with this, a citywide curfew was issued beginning on June 2nd and lasting through the evening of June 5th, which prohibited, among other things, protesting activity from taking place after 8 p.m. nightly. On June 6th, this was lifted. Following these events, the city, as well as APD, received numerous complaints about the response to the protest, and thereafter, City Council unanimously directed that an investigation take place to analyze the police response to the protest during these last few days. Next slide, please. Per the council's direction, I, as city attorney, will be managing this process from start to finish, and it will take place in 2 consecutive phases. I'm going to talk to you today about what those two phases are, where we stand today, and what our next steps are in the near future. I'll also go over what the cumulative total final response will look like to the council and the public. So first and foremost, let me explain the two phases. First and foremost, there is the primary investigation, which will be an assessment of the police response conducted by an independent third party with expertise in policing activities and conduct. Secondarily, but contemporaneous to that first investigation, there will be a second review conducted by me personally, which will conduct interviews of several city staff as well as elected officials. This will take place simultaneous, as I said, to the first investigation and will cover the operational decision-making process regarding several of the aspects of the protest response, which I'll talk about more in just a moment. First, let me say that both of these processes have already begun. So let me tell you where we stand today. Next slide, please. Regarding phase one, this is the larger independent third-party investigation. Now, we have already, over the past week and a half, vetted several options for a potential firm to take on this task. A front runner has emerged, and we are very, very close to finalizing a recommendation for the City Council. I have personally, in the last week, interviewed with this firm as well as their entire team that would be on the streets here in Asheville conducting the analysis. It is our plan to finalize this recommendation in the coming days and to present this proposal to the City Council at your next meeting on July the 14th. City Council will then have the ability to make the final call about selecting this firm or not. Now, regarding phase two, we have already outlined over the past few days the scope of this analysis and a timeline. We have now scheduled all of the initial interviews, which will start to take place next week. It is our intention to finalize all of these interviews within 2 weeks and be able to provide to this committee or to council or both a final written report of the phase two analysis by the end of July. Now, it is our objective with regard to both of these simultaneous phases that this be done in an independent manner. And by independent, I mean this will be conducted by my office and this independent third party outside of APD. It will be done in a competent, thorough manner with the intention of providing the results in an unbiased and fully transparent manner to the council and the public. Next slide, please. Now, as we look at what our next steps are, and these are in the very near term, we do, as I say, plan on presenting to council a recommendation of a firm to undertake the independent third-party investigation on your July 14th calendar. We're very, very close to making that selection now, and we'll be ready by that time. Now, as council has directed, it will have the final word on selecting that firm based upon the recommendations that I will provide. Although this analysis will cover the entirety of the response to the protest, I want to make it clear that we have a set of focus areas that will absolutely be included as part of this process. These include the use of riot gear, the use of tear gas throughout the city, and specifically on the Jeff Bowen Bridge on the first night of the protests, the use of pepper balls as well as other projectile ordnance, any other use of force tactics, the destruction of supplies at the medic tent, as well as the request for outside agency support and the National Guard. Next slide, please. Although we have not finalized this yet, we intend for something along the lines of what you're seeing on your screen now to be the proposed scope of this contract. And it will ask the firm to conduct an objective analysis of whether the strategies and tactics employed by Asheville Police Department in response to the recent protest were consistent with the best practices of modern law enforcement agencies. Special attention must be given to the use of tear gas and other non-lethal ordnance, the deployment of riot gear, and the call for assistance from other agencies and the National Guard, as well as specifically the destruction of water bottles and supplies at the medic tent. Next slide, please. In addition to this, we will insist upon a robust public engagement process as part of this assessment. That will provide the public and members of the public who interacted with APD during the protest to also speak directly with the assessors. as well as anyone from the public who feels that they have additional information that would provide a complete, thorough, and holistic picture of the police response. In addition to this, we will be asking for a court order, which will allow body camera footage to be provided to the assessing firm so that they have the complete picture of what transpired. Finally, we will ask that at the end of this process, that the firm selected will prepare a fully transparent report that will reflect their opinions and, based upon their expertise, provide an assessment to the City Council at a public City Council meeting that can be fully transparent to the members of our community. Based upon the discussions I've had with the firms in contention currently, it's our belief that this process, once started, will take approximately 2 to 3 months for that report to be in front of City Council for a final review. Next slide, please. Now, regarding that simultaneous phase 2, which is the interview process conducted personally by my office, at the direction of City Council, we will be conducting interviews with all members of the City Council, including the mayor, the city manager, the chief of police, as well as any other individuals or city staff that we deem necessary in order to complete this properly. Now, although we will be focusing on a variety of issues, I want to make very clear that we will be delving into several specific areas that overlap some of the subject matter in the phase 1 investigation. These include utilization of riot gear, the request for other agency assistance as well as the National Guard, the use of tear gas and other projectiles, any other use of force, and the activities regarding the destruction of medic tent supplies. Next slide, please. Members of the committee, it is our intention that if we continue to proceed as planned, our hope is to stay roughly on the schedule that you see in front of you. Following today's meeting, we hope that by the City Council meeting on July 14th, we will have a fully vetted, firm recommendation to present to the council for your consideration. During that same time, we will be completing the interviews for our phase 2 portion of the investigation. And by mid-July, that should be prepared for a written report, which should then be presented to either this committee, the council, or both for the phase 2 report by the end of July. Now, we are estimating somewhat, but we believe based upon what we know at this point, that the final phase 1 third-party report and assessment should be prepared by fall of this year. Both of those reports will be intended to be presented as council directs publicly, either at these committees and or City Council as a whole. That is where we stand today. Members of the committee, I'm happy to take any questions or alter our approach if you have additional direction for me.
I have one question as to the final analysis that will be brought to council. Just how detailed was that? The one we had around the Johnny Rush report that I did not feel like was nearly detailed enough.
Yes, thank you, Chairman Haynes. It is our intent to request of this firm that the assessment be as complete and comprehensive as possible. Now, it is important to note that the discussions that we have had with the potential applicants have insisted upon having up to 3 or more members of a team present in Asheville on multiple occasions to interview and analyze all of the potential data that is out there, both internal to the police agency as well as the public. We've already discussed strategies to provide web pages so that the public can have access and knowledge of public meetings, to be able to contact them, and they're coordinating or will be coordinating with my office to help identify the appropriate members of the public who should have input into that. Our goal is to have a comprehensive analysis with objective findings to provide to this council. In conjunction with the phase 2 portion of this, we hope that council will have all the information that it needs. If at any point council feels as if additional steps need to be taken, my office will undertake those.
Brad, oh, I'm sorry, Brian, is it okay? This is Gwen. In addition to, looking at the decisions that were made, et cetera, that are they in conformity with best practices, et cetera. Is there any way we could ask them about, I mean, even if something is, maybe okay legally or best practices, if they're maybe seeing some changes that they might suggest that, although they may not be suggesting that whatever APD was necessarily wrong or inconsistent with best practices, to maybe expand that scope a little bit to see if there are recommendations, again, not indicating necessarily a weakness, but moving forward, how could we improve? That would be the only thing I might suggest that we discuss with these firms.
Thank you for that question, Vice Mayor. I will say that the discussions I have had with our currently proposed firm have included discussions regarding the potential not just to assess, but to provide recommendations going forward. This particular firm, which I believe currently sits as the front runner for the recommendation, not only specializes in doing these analyses, but also in providing advice, recommendation, and a strategic outline for advancing, especially based upon community policing theories, police agencies throughout the country. Some of the firms that we have spoken to have advised police agencies throughout the country, and that is one of their primary roles, not necessarily an after-action report style, but simply there to assist, to give advice based upon the latest trends, best practices, and they have been in some what I would call very hot cities, very difficult situations, situations which, without disclosing any particulars, were national news. And they have advised on these things, and the approach that they take has been so successful. We've spoken to some of the other cities that have obtained their services, and they've often been hired secondarily after the fact to continue to provide recommendations and advice going forward for additional changes that might improve the services provided by those agencies. So I feel completely confident that if we move forward with the firm who is currently our front runner, or anyone else that would outpace them, you would have the ability and expertise in that firm to approach this, not just from an analysis standpoint, but also from a standpoint of looking forward and adapting to the most modern and effective policies going forward.
Brad, I would like to just jump in here and say thank you for your presentation and your report. So far, it looks very good. As one of the council members who initially called for this investigation, I feel very proud today that you are the principal in charge of overseeing this investigation. But it's very important to me and my constituents that there's the slightest hint of conflict of interest here. So the direction that you have provided and the timeline that you have provided is perfect as of now, of course. I trust you in this role, and I want to make it plain, very plain, that when we gave you charge of this investigation, we also wanted to make it known that your investigation will not supersede this committee's inquiry. It will not limit our scope of questioning or prohibit us in bringing people to testify concerning this matter. So with that being said, we did submit some questions ahead of time, and a lot of those questions have been answered, but a few of them have not been answered fully around deployment of tear gas and specifically use of force. Can you please explain to me what part of state law, if state law applies to this, will restrict us or prohibit us from having those questions answered? Is it like personnel policy, criminal investigation, criminal intelligence? And in that, plus, I want to know what path forward do you see involving or utilizing the court in order for us to get information from this committee fulfilled?
Thank you, Committee Member Smith. I appreciate the question, and I do appreciate the confidence in the City Council on this matter. We take this seriously as part of our job, and we will do everything we can to honor that confidence that you've shown in us. It is our goal to assist this committee in its ability to function independently of this process. And whatever steps it feels as if it needs to do to supplement that process, my office will be there to assist, to advise on your efforts as well. That is extraordinarily important to us, that this committee and City Council as a whole is recognized as the leader in this operation. The council has taken it on as the driving force behind this, and my office, with me personally at the lead of that, will serve as your instrument in doing this process the way that council believes it needs to be done for the community and to satisfy council's desire to see this thing vetted properly. With regard to your question more specifically, Councilwoman Smith, I would say that we could talk a lot about the legal limitations. There are some. Primarily, and I'm going to speak generally about this first, there are personnel confidentiality laws that apply to various aspects of someone's personnel file. Some information is a public record, but we are prohibited from releasing other information. Now, there are exceptions to those things. There are some specific laws that apply directly to sworn law enforcement officers. So some of your question I can best answer at this point by saying, when talking about specific officers, we're going to be much more limited by state law in what we are allowed to produce publicly. But generally speaking, when we're talking, let me give an example. If we were to, as this committee requested, produce the total number of arrests made, the total number of officers involved, this does not have that sort of individualized information that, although still important, is something that we can provide outside of those personnel law restrictions. And I believe would certainly be part of the analysis and evaluation efforts, both from my office as well as from the third-party investigation. So there will be some limitations there, but on a generalized context, much less so. Now, I will also say that, as I mentioned during my presentation, it is our intent to make sure that the investigative firm has all the information that it needs, and we believe that would likely include recordings such as body cam or vehicle cameras. It is our intention, if so requested by that firm, to assist them in the process to obtain the necessary court approval to allow that firm to see those videos. Now, as we go through that process, we will continue, hopefully, to be nimble with the request to assist them, but as I said, also to assist your committee in what needs to be done. The only other limitation I would have is that we are trying to work on what we consider to be a very aggressive but very doable schedule. We recognize fully that the public wants to hear these things now, that it's important for the confidence of the public, that they understand that we review ourselves and that we maintain, to the best of our ability, the public's ability to trust what we do. And in doing that, we hope that this will be conducted quickly, but not so fast as to sacrifice the thorough nature that needs to be part of this. So I would only ask that the committee fully proceed as it sees fit, but with regard to our particular process, we will unlikely to release any information until we have a fully comprehensive report. And we do that as a matter of practicality, because I believe it's important that the entire story be told and not snippets, especially because we consider it vitally important that we engage the public on this. And we want to hear directly from them, from their firsthand knowledge, and not what they may have read in the media from some additional source. So we believe, and what attorneys often say is, we don't want our witnesses tainted. We want to hear the truth from them, and we really want to engage in them in an unbiased fashion. So we will reserve our final reports, unless otherwise directed by this committee or council, until we're completed, until we have done it in a complete, thorough, holistic manner. But hopefully we'll do that as expeditiously as possible, because we believe that's what has been requested of us.
Well, so you explained a little bit about the body cam footage being released to the firm, but is there any circumstance and instance that it would need to be released to council? Because we've kind of lived in this situation before where it was really important and critical that we review body cam footage, and it was not released in a timely fashion, and the communication kind of lapsed. So right now here, I would like to ask you, do you foresee a scenario or an instance where body cam footage will be seen by the firm, but also released to council?
Thank you for that question. I think it's another excellent one. The short answer is that is absolutely a legal possibility. There are, again, some steps that we have to get through. So I can't guarantee it until a judge tells me that I could. But if council so directed and felt the need that was part of your own evaluation process as this committee or as the full council, my office would go through the process of providing you all of the legal advice necessary to make that decision and then pursue that if necessary.
Any further questions? If not, thank you very much, Brad.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will mute and move along.
Next, we will go to information on APD military supply inventory and surplus. Chief David Zach will now provide an update on APD's military supply inventory and surplus. Welcome, Chief.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of City Council, City Manager Campbell. I've been requested here today on two specific agenda items, but also I received in a separate email a series of questions from the committee regarding the protests occurring between May 31st and June 6th. In relation to agenda item number 1, and that is the information on APD military supply, inventory, and surplus. What I've done is forwarded committee members APD's complete current inventory of all weapons and munitions. That's what we currently have in stock. What I can report is in relation to the 1033 program that is administered by the U.S. Law Enforcement Support Office, that APD does not participate in that program. I've been informed in years past, many years past, they had, but it's been quite some time since there was any level of participation in the 1033 program. And I can report that we have no intentions in the future to acquire any military surplus equipment from the federal government. Regarding agenda item number 2, which is an update on more or less where we've made progress and the initiatives we have moving forward.
Chief, could I interrupt for a moment?
Sure, sorry.
And I hate to, but if I write down my question, I may not be able to read it.
I apologize for going too fast.
So as far as pertaining to the military equipment that we have, what about armored vehicles of any sort? I know that we have at least one because I've seen it.
That particular vehicle, the Bearcat, that is in cooperation with the Buncombe County Sheriff's Office. That is a shared piece of equipment. It's not owned by APD or the city.
I have. There you go. Go on, Brian. Oh,
No, that's good.
I just want to interject because I have a question along that same line. I know we do have the ability, we might not have things in our stockpile, but we do have the ability to procure from other cities. And so I wanted to know during this instance if we procured any special equipment from any other cities in order for this demonstration.
We did, in particularly tear gas.
And there is a report of that expense?
We're in the process of trying to obtain that. We did have, many other agencies participating, so that, we're going to have to rely somewhat on their record keeping as well as our own.
Okay, Chief. Sorry to interrupt.
No problem. So weeks back, I was asked to report to council with a 30, 60, 90 plan. I can answer specific questions regarding that presentation if you'd like, but I just want to make clear that plan for APD was really being developed well prior to the June protests. You know, we began pretty much as soon as I arrived here in Asheville. I'd also like to make clear that this plan for improvement, it's a plan for continuous improvement, and it's not something that's going to end at 90 days. This will be continuous improvement over time, not only to build on existing programs, but also to engage the community and get their input in determining how we reimagine police service collaboratively with our community partners here in Asheville. If you have any questions on that 30, 60, 90 plan, I'm prepared to answer anything that you have or concerns or more clarification.
I just wanted to insert something because now the community is really paying attention. And I think there are some things that we had proposed prior to this incident, specifically around adding pedestrians to our written consent policy and deprioritizing traffic stops. I foresee that being a request made by community. And I know when you first came, you wanted to kind of interact with some data before you made it a final determination. Can we continue with that plan and see if we can include that? Because I do foresee it's going to be a large push from the community since so much work had been done around that area.
Ms. Smith, I would have to say that at this point, all conversations are on the table.
Thank you. I have one more question here, Chief, pertaining to the 30, 60, 90-day plan, possibly. So through a secondhand source, I heard that APD has begun to staff a new community resource department of sorts. Is this accurate, and if so, could you please describe the role of this new unit?
No, there has been no staffing arrangements made at this time. It is something that I did present to council, that organizational chart, which would include the creation of a new division devoted completely to community engagement. No staffing has taken place. If I'm, as long as there's no additional concerns with the creation of that division, we will move forward.
Okay, I think there will be concerns, but thank you.
Right. And may I say, what I'd like to put forth to clarify the creation of that division, its sole purpose is to have the ear to actually implement and hear the concerns of the community. It's really the Achilles heel of this organization right now, that there is no infrastructure whatsoever, formal infrastructure, to hear from the community and to have them have their involvement at all levels of the organization. So the creation of that division is to give me that ear, and its direction and our direction will be dictated primarily from what we hear and the input we receive from our community.
Thank you.
So as I said, I did receive a number of questions from committee members directly related to the protest. I can answer those as best I can. Of course, I don't want to say anything that is not 100% accurate, nor do I want in any way to damage the investigation moving forward or say anything that, like I say, might be inaccurate or may cause problems for us down the road with the investigation. So I'll answer those questions as best I can. This was the list I received, and if you'd like, I'll just go through them one at a time. Is that
Great.
okay?
Great. Yes.
Question number one was in relation to the discharge of tear gas on the crowd of protesters gathered on the Jeff Bowen Bridge. I did issue a separate, have a separate press conference on that, and the information that I provided at that time. I have provided each member of committee a copy of that press briefing. If you'd like, I could just read the whole thing right back into the record, or you can just refer back to the information that I have forwarded to you.
Chief, I don't have it in front of me, and the only part that was sort of unclear to me was the paragraph where it discussed the protesters moving on. It didn't actually seem to have them moving onto the Bowen Bridge. It stated that they were, police set up a bicycle blockade at the corner of Patton and Klingman, but it didn't really make it clear as how they still made it all the way onto the Jeff Bowen Bridge.
Yes, from what I gave in that press conference at that time is that bike barricade, if you want to call it that, was set up, and that was physically broken through, where contact was actually made with the officers prior to gaining access to the bridge. So we did try to set up a soft line to move the protesters in a different direction. That was defeated physically, and which led to, the events that occurred thereafter.
I have some questions about what happened on the Jeff Bowen Bridge. In reading a lot of information about the tactical use of tear gas, not to say that I agree with the use, but because we did use it, I have some questions on that line. It said verbatim that you need to be very cautious of the presence of women and children, and this must be considered before any launch. And from what I observed on a live footage, a Facebook live footage, there were a number of children on the bridge at that time. The information that I read also said that before using and launching tear gas, it is the onus of the officer to make sure that there are clear exit routes left for the crowd to disperse. And when I'm getting firsthand information from individuals on that bridge, it makes me believe that as they were approaching, they were approaching your line of men, that tear gas was let off into the crowd, but also behind the crowd. So they were prevented. It kind of it restricted their movement. So they could not go back. They were stuck there and immersed in a lot of tear gas. So, and also that before you launch tear gas, it is preceded by a very clear warning. So I see all three of those things being compromised a lot in this situation. Would you like to give a response or interact to what I just said?
Sure. I mean, again, all of this information, everything that you're requesting will be unearthed in the more extensive, deeper dive into into events that occur. So I think all those questions will be answered. In my statement following that event, I did say, that information that I was providing at that time may change. Because we're waiting on a more in-depth investigation, I was informed that warnings were given. I was informed that an exit route off the exit ramp was provided. And in relation to the concern of children being exposed to tear gas, there was also a concern because of what happened up on the interstate in 55-mile-an-hour traffic, where three citizens and one police officer were hit by a moving vehicle. There was concerns of protesters possibly trying to re-access the interstate, where we could have seen far greater tragedy. So all those concerns went into the decision to deploy tear gas on the Bowen Bridge. But again, a deeper dive will reveal more information that I'm just not prepared that I can't say with a 100% certainty at this time, but I'm certain it will all be made available and will come out. Anything else? Okay. Thank you. Next slide. The next question is, what were officers instructed leading up to the protest concerning the discharging of tear gas, rubber bullets, or other weaponry? Were they to wait for orders from a superior officer? Were they allowed to use their own discretion based on what they see happening on the ground? Was there a criteria for them to follow, outlining what actions would give rise to the use of force? And did instructions differ pertaining to specific weapons? There's a lot there that I don't have the answer to. The answer to orders and instructions, they vary throughout the event as intelligence is received. There are certain questions or certain directives that came out in pre-planning as the incident changed and evolved. There's decisions that are made in the field as a combination of all of the above. And I think at this time, it's best for those questions to be reviewed and answered again by the independent panels, because I don't have answers to all of them right now. And that is the best answer I can give. Anything further?
Well, Chief, so I get what you're saying, but as far as this question goes, at least some of it would have started with you, I assume, or no? Nothing here?
Certainly. I'm sorry, I interrupted. I apologize.
I was through. Go.
Certainly the deployment of our crowd control team, which consists of our mobile field force and our bicycle response team, and having them available to be deployed if necessary. There is no question that decision was approved by myself.
But you were not personally involved with authorizing when or this weaponry might be used, or this use of force?
The discretion, there's a lot of discretion that is left to the commanders in the field. They have wide discretion based on the training that they receive.
Thank you.
Chief Zach, before you leave, I just have a few questions for you. And these are pretty much kind of in alignment with policy used during the protest. We know that the state of emergency was declared by the mayor. So do you believe that measures taken by your police force in regards to the demonstration rose to the level of a critical incident response?
Yes, without question.
Mm-hmm. So since that is the case, I'm wondering if you can please explain to me how de-escalation and use of force policies and protocols operate with a mass gathering. We kind of have an idea of how it works engaging individuals, but not with the mass gathering, because there's certain reports and attending to injuries that need to take place in order for that policy to be completely fulfilled and abided by.
That is a really, really difficult question to answer when you're talking about, peaceful protesters, non-peaceful protesters, how to de-escalate. There's no manual when you have crowds of 100 to 1,000, which we saw and estimated, to say how best de-escalate this particular situation. But I think it was widely reported and widely documented that on numerous occasions, we were interacting with protesters in creating dialogue at Vance Monument, but also on the line in front of the police station. I was involved in many of those conversations with protesters, as were members of our team. And you would have saw on several occasions where I, myself, and members of our crowd control team in full riot gear knelt in solidarity with protesters in an attempt to de-escalate, which worked extremely well for us on the first night of protest. The second night of protest was a completely different situation, where it's tough to de-escalate with bottles, rocks, and explosives being thrown in your direction to effectively de-escalate that situation.
But do you think that'll be explored in the after action plan, like coming up with some different ways that you can kind of manage and make certain commands, verbal commands, to kind of de-escalate things before you use any type of force?
I personally heard on numerous occasions warnings to disperse.
So
Again, I think it will all be covered in the after action as well.
So how do officers, once they have deployed some type of tactic, how do they write up those reports?
That would normally take the form of an after action report prepared by us. So those after action, this is why, again, because of the concerns we have, and we know the community concerns, we're prepared. We will testify and provide information on all of the actions taken. There are records, of radio logs, and again, going through body-worn camera footage, things of that nature. Normally, we would be conducting that ourselves, but on such a wide-scale event with thousands of hours of body-worn camera footage, for us to go through that would completely debilitate, which is why we requested, as did council, an outside review to help facilitate those reports.
Yeah, I can imagine that there's a lot of body cam footage from people who are on the ground, but there's probably not that much from individuals who actually deployed, less lethal force.
Yeah, it should be there because, again, they're working in close proximity to officers who are outfitted with body-worn cameras.
Thank you.
And there's certainly enough footage available online that was recorded by others.
Thank you.
Certainly.
I have some additional questions, or just a couple of additional questions, please, Chief. One, are APD officers trained in a crowd control tactic known as kettling? Was that tactic employed by APD during the protests that began on Sunday, May 31st? And are you aware of the controversy surrounding the use of this tactic?
Could you, Mr. Haynes, that's not a term I'm familiar with. What?
Well, it's being widely discussed on the internet as being used by police forces throughout the nation during these protests, and it's a form of corralling folks into areas.
Boxing?
But it's being referred to as kettling.
Okay, I've heard kettling, I've heard boxing.
Okay.
Would that be similar?
Well, it would be similar. I don't know if it's exactly the same, but so my question is: Are APD officers trained in that tactic, and did we use that tactic?
No, officers are trained. Our crowd control teams are trained to always make sure that an outlet is available and to not box in during large demonstrations. That there always has to be an avenue to escape and to move to. Of course, we try to control that movement as best as possible, but it's clearly can be hampered, depending on the activity of the large scale event.
Okay. My second question is, we have received many complaints concerning openly armed individuals attending the protest and the lack of response from APD officers to deal with these individuals. Now that the city attorney has laid out violations that have occurred, has APD revised their position in dealing with this matter?
Are we referring to the other evening? Or
I think more than one evening, but
what I can tell you, and if we're talking about just this evening from this past Sunday, investigations are underway, and there will be, as we're able to identify individuals, and we're already having some level of success, that we do anticipate charges being filed and arrests made.
Chief, just to follow up there, so in the future, if this were to happen again, and my guess is it will, how will it be dealt with on the ground?
Mr. Haynes, that is a very delicate matter. When we are dealing, we know from the arrests made during the first nights of protest and the protest just this past evening, where there was painting in the street next to the municipal building, that there were a lot of weapons there. from protesters and counter protesters alike with a very limited number of officers on scene. And our officers are doing their very best to de-escalate those situations. And you must remember too that we are extremely outnumbered in a lot of these situations, and with guns open carry and also concealed, we know there's both present at the time. More often than not, as an event is emerging, we just want people to not start shooting and to protect the public and to protect the protesters themselves. We can always go back later and try and identify and lay charges, but the immediate concern is to not have gunfire open out on both sides. And it's a very delicate balancing act on when to effect an arrest. Also, when we're outnumbered, to effect an arrest, now we lose those resources and the numbers against us become even larger. So it's a very difficult predicament to be in, to try to de-escalate when we have many armed people in a crowd actively going at one another. So it's a very, very tough call. And ideally, you'd like to be able to, arrest right on scene, but that could go sideways in multiple ways. And you just have to give the officers who are trying to deal with that situation, and what we all know is a time with very intense emotion on both sides, who are doing their very best to keep either side from getting hurt. And there's a lot of guns out there. And we're doing our very best to make it safe, but we have limited resources as well, and we have to use our best judgment.
Thank you.
The third question I was asked was, how was the decision authorizing what weapons would be made and who was involved in that decision? What I can tell you is we have standard operating procedures when specialty units are activated, and the equipment is outlined what they carry when they are activated. So they are our specialty units are equipped with specific tactical equipment that they are trained to use. So we don't, once they're activated, they come in basically with the equipment that they're outfitted with, and then its use will be determined by the commanders in the field. So for example, our mobile field force, they are equipped with tear gas, and they take that into the field with them. If it becomes necessary to use, they are trained in its use, in its deployment. Question number 4 was, we would like a complete list of weapons APD discharged throughout the protests, along with data showing the number of tear gas canisters used. This is one of those questions we need additional time to gather the information from what was in our previous inventory and what we now have. And again, I think that question will be answered by the independent investigator. But again, we did have to bring additional resources to the scene, and we will have to rely on what their record keeping is in order to know all that was deployed during the event.
Can this information also be shared with the Public Safety Committee or Council when completed?
Absolutely. As to the number of arrests and charges brought down and the type of charges, I have submitted that to committee members in an email. I can tell you that 57 individuals were arrested with a total of 84 charges related to the protest between May 31st and June 4th. I can also report that 2 individuals that were arrested were in possession of concealed firearms.
So saying that, how is that different than in that massive gathering than the gathering we saw the other night, where we saw individuals who were violating the ordinance to have guns in a public park. I'm trying to, I guess, constituents will say, and I say that is an inequity in arrest.
What happened there, Ms. Smith, was those weapons were discovered incident to arrest. So they were arrested for other charges related to the protest. And then when they were searched before entering the jail, the weapons were discovered.
But our force didn't know that the weapons that were flashed the other night and openly carried the other night were in violation of our public park ordinance. Yes, sir.
Our feeling is they were. The question was, do you try to affect the arrest at that time and potentially escalate the situation? And do we have adequate numbers to affect those arrests? So that was the decision made by the commanders in the field at the time, that particular moment in time was not a good time to try to affect arrests. We would have basically lost our ability to effectively control what was happening. And it was thought better, we're going to come back later and try and identify and make arrests later. And that's what we're doing. It was a tough situation out there, Ms. Smith.
Chief, this is Gwen. We received this. Can you tell me what AWDW, government official, means? It was on June 1st.
I'm sorry. Assault with a deadly weapon.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, if there's no further questions, moving on to question 6. Have we received complaints against officers for excessive use of force during protests? What is the status of those complaints and the process for handling those complaints? We have received no formal complaints from a single individual reporting excessive use of force on them during the protests. What we are doing, however, is we are reviewing footage of the actual arrests that were made to see if any excessive force was being used in the effect of those arrests. But we have received no formal complaints. In relation to warnings that were issued before tear gas and other tactics that were used, again, APD policy dictates that warnings must be given before the deployment of force. And again, the independent investigator will determine if policy was followed and warnings were provided before the use of tear gas. If there are no questions, the final question that I was asked is what injuries, if any, were sustained by APD or other agencies? We have received reports of multiple knee, ankle, leg, and foot injuries, an ear injury, burns, cuts. We did have an officer set on fire, burns, cuts, and abrasions. In addition, our embedded services and internal peer support teams are receiving numerous requests for the services that they provide.
Chief, there, I would ask what civilian injuries are you aware of?
The most severe injury that I have been made aware of involved a protester who was hit over the head with a steel frying pan. That frying pan was intended for one of our officers and just missed striking the officer, and the follow-through hit the protester. And it's my understanding that that individual is still at the hospital with a skull fracture. I can also report that after that individual was hit, aid was rendered by APD, and APD brought that individual back inside our lines at the municipal building where we received treatment from APD, or I should say AFD, the fire department, before transport to Mission Hospital. That's the most serious injury that I know of.
Thank you.
I don't have any questions, but thank you for offering yourself today. And thank you for at least coming and having, being as transparent as you can be at the time. And I look forward to more questions to come and kind of resolving this issue and figuring out a clear path forward.
Thank you, Ms. Smith.
And I thank you as well, Chief.
Me
Thank you.
too.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Okay, next we will move to public comment. Staff, do we have anyone in the speaker queue?
We do. Just a second while we shut down the front computer. Caller Overton Reed, your line is open. We're going to move to our next caller. Ben Spencer, I'm going to open your line.
Hello, my name is Ben Spencer. I live in South Asheville. I just wanted to make a few comments here. There was a recent study released by the University of Chicago that showed the 20 largest police departments don't meet the basic UN principles of the use of force and firearms by law enforcement officials, to which the United States is a signatory. I'm really curious, does the Asheville Police Department internal policy meet these basic principles of use of force and firearms? That's something that I would like to see somebody look into who is independent from the police department. Additionally, as we're talking about public safety, I think it's as we begin to move away from our use of the police department, one of the things we should use some of those funds for is encouraging and sponsoring classes for the community at large in mediation and de-escalation. That should be a high priority in order to help people de-escalate their own conflicts. And now I know Police Chief Zach mentioned that the officers at the protest on this previous Sunday were doing their best to de-escalate things. What I witnessed after viewing several different videos and live streams of that was that more of that de-escalation was occurring from members of the community there. So I'm a bit curious as to what exactly he is referring to with that. I would again like to express my support for defunding the Asheville Police Department by 50% and reallocating those funds into other important areas in the community in order to encourage and support safety and opportunity for all citizens of Asheville. I believe this is going to be additionally important as we continue to see the effects of COVID-19, as we continue to climb in cases as a state. It's important that those resources are going directly to the community and not through a department. I would additionally like to see the public engagement wing that Police Chief Zach was talking about be separated completely from the police department. I think it's important that if you are seeking legitimate comment, that it goes through an independent agency or wing in order that it can be expressed without fear of reprisal. Thank you very much. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. And let me throw in right quick that I forgot to say that you will have 3 minutes to comment. And at the end of the 3 minutes, you will hear a bell and I will ask you to wrap up your comment. And we will hold public comment for up to 1 hour. Next caller, please.
Ending 6599, your line is open. We seem to have lost that caller. I'm going to move to the next person in the queue.
Hi, this is Grace Martinez calling again. At this point in time, it's become abundantly clear to this committee and to the council as a whole that our community is demanding that the police be defunded and that the Asheville Police Department and Chief Zach be held accountable for their despicable actions at both the protests and within the department as a whole with their discriminatory racist practices. It's also clear that the Asheville Police Department is showing blatant disregard for the actions of KKK members, white supremacists, and white nationalists. Furthermore, the councils, the city manager, and Mayor Mannheimer have now become complicit in the favor being shown to these hate groups through inaction as it pertains to the ongoing danger that these hate groups pose. We are in a state of emergency, and our entire community is at risk as these radical extremists are given every opportunity to move forward with their intimidation and threats. I used to believe that our government has systems in place to prevent or at least respond to these kind of atrocities. In the past month, I have gotten a crash course in how our city government works. I've been shocked to learn that there is seemingly no one at the reins willing to take control when it comes to our local police force, which is armed and dangerous with weapons used routinely against our citizens and who have the power to enslave people through incarceration. This impact has fallen most harshly on an ongoing basis and targeted at the Black community. It is unconscionable to me at this point that David Zach still has a job. His answers to the questions he faced today further demonstrate his complete ineptitude and inability to do his job in providing public safety, and he is responsible for the massive public harm and injury to our people. I recognize that Asheville has been through quite a few corrupt and unethical police chiefs, but isn't the answer to that right there in the question? Why are we hiring people who come from police backgrounds to be in charge of a department that is clearly deeply ingrained in discriminatory practices that uphold white supremacy through brute force, as it was designed to do? We need to look outside of the existing system in our replacement of Chief Zach. We need to find a non-cop candidate who is prepared to eliminate every member of the Asheville Police Department who is found to use discriminatory arrest practices and uses unnecessary force. Every officer who shot our citizens at point blank range, who destroyed our medical supplies, who stood by as hate group members threatened citizens with semi-automatic weapons, and who have a history of disparate arrest and harassment of Black and brown citizens should be fired immediately by this new chief. The new chief should be a person who is focused on replacing officers with qualified professionals who are not police to handle community issues of homelessness, substance use disorder, domestic violence, and mental health issues which plague our community. This new chief should also immediately remove all stockpiles of military-grade weapons. I appreciate the thought to have an investigation into the conduct of the police during these protests, but you have hours of public comment at this point that show the testimony of the wildly unprofessional and dangerous behavior of the department. We do not have time to wait. The danger is immediate. Are you waiting for someone in our community to be killed by these hate groups before you make your next move? Are you waiting 2 more weeks before another meeting? We do not have 2 weeks. We don't have another day. Bureaucratic constraints are not an excuse for this inaction. The only time is now. If Chief Zach is not removed by the city manager, she should lose her job and be replaced with someone who will take immediate action that is needed to protect our community in this crucial moment. Shanika and Brian, I have immense respect for both of you. Please use your power and influence and have the courage that this moment requires. And I'm personally prepared to support you in any way that I can.
Thank you.
Hi there. My name is Sarah Terra. I live in North Asheville.
Sarah, are you still there? Sarah, if you can call back in, I'll get you in the next queue. I'm going to move to the next caller. Caller ending 1547.
Hello?
You're on the line.
Hey, my name is Mike. I live in Asheville, North Carolina. I guess a few things. I echo every sentiment that was previously displayed. I think that the 30, 60, 90-day plan is incremental and it requires more funding, and that's not what the community is asking for. What demands that the community is asking for is the police department doing, or because at this point, the protesters have been hit by flashbang canisters, pepper balls, rubber bullets, and that's on peaceful protesters. Of course, there was a few people throughout that protest who were not, but they were not removed by the police. The police did not stand with the citizens of this town. You stood against us in riot gear. While 2 weeks later, they will stand in conversation with smiles on their face, talking to known KKK members with with guns. And you expect, we're supposed to trust the police in this city. We're supposed to trust them. How can we trust the people who are supposed to protect us when you will shoot us at point blank range? And I already didn't trust the police before this. And I come from a family of law enforcement. But I assure you, I will not be calling the police any longer. What is the city going to do to regain trust? Bye.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Nettie Fisher. I'm a resident and a native of Asheville. I first want to say I really appreciate especially Councilwoman Smith and Councilman Haynes for asking the tough questions, and it's really refreshing to see you all asking these things so we don't have to call and ask them. So thank you, and I encourage other council members to start doing the same. I also want to thank Chief Zach. We understand that you have a tough job and none of us envy your position, but you took this job and it is time to step up. So I have a couple comments on your 30, 60, 90-day plan. I appreciate that you've recognized that we don't trust you. So as the previous caller stated, you have a lot to do to address that specifically, to address our specific asks and needs and not just come up with your own. One of the specific things I wanted to comment on is the Community Engagement Division. I understand that you are seeing this as your ear to the community, but we are asking that this be a separate division. You can come up with whatever you want within APD to try to be your PR, customer service, community service, whatever. You need that. We have officers already that come into the community and attend meetings and hear from people. Obviously, yes, you're not doing a good enough job of that. But what we're reading about the Community Engagement Division is that is going to be people that are responding to these types of public safety issues that do not need to be police. So therefore, that division and those people that are responding to those issues do not need to be police. We're, like the previous caller stated, we're not calling the police anymore. So we need to create new systems. They can partner with the police, whatever, until the interim that we can transition away from that entirely. But the Community Engagement Division and those individuals responding to mental health issues should not be housed within APD, and that is non-negotiable. I also want to point out the implementation of gun violence reduction strategy item in the plan says that the data-driven identification of responsible groups and individuals at the highest risk of being involved in a shooting. Data-driven identification sounds to me like racial profiling, even if it's done by an AI. AIs can have racism built into them too. That's what we're seeing, that these are systemic problems. So I just want to call that out, and let's talk more about that, please, in the ongoing discussions that you are saying we're going to have. So I also just want to respond to something that you mentioned about the open carry in this conversation. I understand that you are trying to protect the lives of our citizens and of the officers that work for you. But what happened on these nights that men with, and women, I don't know, people with AR-15s, very intimidating looking guns. I don't know guns. Were walking around and threatening and harassing people. This is unacceptable. And for your officers to not even let them know that that's not acceptable for them to do that, it makes you look complicit and it makes you look like you're allying with them. So really, please check that. And I have more to say, but I'll call back another time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Maddie Schuler. I'm a resident of Asheville. I wanted to specifically address what happened on Sunday, and Chief David Zach, I wanted to remind you of the North Carolina General Statute 14-277.2. Section A states it shall be unlawful for any person participating in, affiliated with, or present as a spectator at any parade, funeral procession, picket line, or demonstration upon any public place owned or under the control of the state or any of its political subdivisions to willfully or intentionally possess or have immediate access to any dangerous weapon. Violation of this subsection shall be a Class 1 misdemeanor. You say that you have limited resources, but what I'm wondering is why unarmed, peaceful protesters continue to be met with tear gas, rubber bullets, armored vehicles, and handcuffs, while known KKK members who show up armed with assault rifles, spewing hate speech, get met with casual conversation as was shown on Sunday. Chief Zach, the actions of your department speak so much louder than any words that came out of your mouth today. You gave a lot of fluff answers today and did not actually address or acknowledge our concerns. You have lost our trust and you have failed us. That's all I have to say.
Thank you.
So I wrote out this comment because I wanted to specifically be able to have the chief of police hear what I wanted to say. And I'm sure he won't listen to this now, but there were women and children all over the front lines of that bridge for the protest. There was no safe, quote unquote, safe exit. And there were absolutely no warnings about tear gas or pepper spray bullets before they were fired. We had to keep an eye on when the cops would reach for tear gas canisters or face their pepper spray bullet guns towards the ground. I put my body in front of multiple children who did not want to walk away from the front of the crowd because they couldn't find their parents in the chaos. Upon our turning around to march back into the city, we were met with more violence the exact same night. Rubber bullets were shot into the crowd where children were still visibly present. Flashbangs and tear gas canisters were thrown with absolutely no warning. After 6 hours of this violence, APD kneeled after Black organizers begged them to do so. After their kneeling, more tear gas and flashbangs were thrown to make us leave the area. Despite them never announcing a call to disperse, there was no curfew in place at this time. This violent abuse of power is beyond unacceptable and unfortunately unsurprising. No one trusts the police. They haven't for a long time now. But as for the other night, the cops stated and repeated themselves that they, quote unquote, weren't able to do anything about the counter protesters brandishing their assault rifles until someone got hurt.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Katie Hudson. I'm a resident of North Asheville. I was just calling to bring up the point that I was going to ask a question, but want to bring up the point that people are not going to be able to trust the transparency of the inquiry into what happened, the official inquiry from the attorney and the independent investigation, if there's no guarantee that there will not be backlash to protesters and community members that come forward to share their part of the story. And that might be why you haven't received any official complaints of injuries, because as everybody has said, no one trusts the police. We don't trust that if we bring forward our stories of violence perpetrated against us, that we won't face further violence and retaliation in investigations into us in the future for participating lawfully in protests. I also want to echo the sentiments of everybody else that's come before us. There, as Chief David Zag said, there's no infrastructure for public feedback to actually get implemented right now, and this is where we have to do it. And so we've taken to the streets to tell you what we need. And it smacks of irony and disrespect to come forward with a proposal that you're going to listen to people when we are actively telling you what we want right now. And you haven't put any implementation or proposed any ways to implement our proposals. Again, I just want to highlight that it's really dangerous for the community to engage with a force that doesn't guarantee our safety throughout every step of the engagement process with the police department. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, you all. My name is Rebecca LeBlue. I've been a resident of Asheville, North Carolina now for about 14 years. I definitely want to, of course, start by just echoing all the sentiments of all the callers that come before me. But I'm specifically calling to leave a comment that I hope Zach would be here personally to hear. And I hope he will listen to these comments, of course, after this broadcast. But to specifically talk about the 30, 60, 90-day plan and specifically the creation of the Community Engagement Division, which I'm sure you all already are getting the sense that we have as a community, a general distrust for. But I'd sort of like to elaborate on that. Really, I think we all want to believe that Chief Zach's desire to create this task force is well-intentioned, but it's obvious that there's no community trust. And for that reason, I think more important than anything, and rather than Zach, sort of centering himself in the department and saying, well, this is what we want to do, sort of what some callers before me have said, that it's important for him to sort of step back and realize that his intentions should not be at the center of this, and this creation of this division, especially when it seems it has not come with collaboration from any community groups, is really dangerous and self-serving, and sort of a facade of progress forward without really dealing with the criticism that's coming forward from the community right now. Rather, if we sort of reallocate funding, I know a lot of us are calling for this 50% reduction in the APD budget, and I do hope we move that way and to full abolishment, in my opinion, but besides the point. But if we're able to reallocate some of this funding to communities, we can prevent unnecessary violence against people of color by police officers in communities that they don't belong to and that they don't understand, and as we've seen, handle with care. There are local community advocacy groups that are already doing the work of dealing with homelessness, mental illness, and drug use, and to defer our funding and our support away from the community groups that have been doing this work now already, and to give it to police officers is not only disrespectful, it's dangerous, and doesn't acknowledge the power that the community has in caring for itself. And we should be supporting those groups rather than the police department. I'd also like to say that, Zach said today that this group is going to be about listening and getting an ear into the community, but on the plan, it says it's about quick response. And Zach also said today about, talking about officers in the field, that they have a, quote, wide discretion, which is really unsettling to hear. There was not a lot of clear answers that I feel came out of what Zach said today. I know I don't feel alone in that, but this idea of wide discretion and pairing it with what kind of work is supposedly going to be dealt with by this Community Engagement Division, it just, for me, it doesn't sound safe. And I think our resources should be going to the groups that are already doing this work. If you don't mind, I'd love to just end on a really short quote from the ex-Dallas police chief, David Brown, that I think really sums up sort of what a lot of we're saying. but that is, quote, "We are asking cops to do too much in this country. Every societal failure, we put it off on the cops to solve. Not enough mental health funding, let the cops handle it. Here in Dallas, we have a loose dog problem. Let's have the cops choose.
Sorry, we appreciate your comment.
No problem.
Your time is up.
I understand.
Thank you very much.
Understand.
Thank you, Brian.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi, my name is James Hemphill. I've lived in Asheville since class of 91, T.C. Robertson. We've got a long history of problems with the APD in this city. We've watched gay bashing. We've watched the women in black get arrested for standing there. We've seen this problem. We've seen these problems repeatedly over the decades. I have concerns with the independent oversight that you're not asking about basic legality, because on the surface, it seems like many of the actions the APD took during these protests violated every level of the rule of law we have in this country, from international treaty to our constitutions, federal law, state law, all of them. Like, that should be addressed. The compliance with our own use of force policies. Why is that not in there? Like, did we meet our own burden? That's a problem. When you get to the mistrust of the APD, you look at the Freedom of Information Act requests and the responses since the protests that they've passed out. Quoting HIPAA when people ask for metrics about officers that were damaged. That does not engender trust. That makes us think you will lie, like, for anything to keep from looking bad. The Community Engagement Division, it sounds nice, but unless it also gives the community insight into all of the inner workings of the APD, then it's just a PR branch, and it will fail. There's a petition right now with 4,300 signatures calling for Chief Zach's resignation. I hope those numbers go down. We want to believe, but so far, he hasn't shown us anything. What? You've been here 4 months. So far, you've got some constitutional rights violations, some cracked skulls to show for it. If you're going to do better, get to it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Claudia Konijn. I live in North Asheville. I've been an Asheville resident since 2003. Been listening with interest to Chief Zach's answers to the questions that were posed to him. I'm not impressed with the answers. I was there for all the marches before and after the instatement of a curfew. I can tell you from a first-person experience that there was a lot of use of force without any provocation and any reason. There were definitely children present when tear gas and flashbangs and rubber bullets were deployed. I think I've seen myself that on 4 occasions that the deployment of those things increased violence instead of making everybody disperse. There were no warnings issued. And I hope that comes out of that independent investigation. I want to say something about this 30, 60, 90-day improvement. To me, it sounds like more of the same, business as usual. And I think it's been very clear that the citizens of Asheville do not want more of the same and business as usual, not to continue in the same way with cosmetic changes and a veneer of progress. I want to refer you all back to the Black Asheville demands that were presented at the beginning of the protests and that we all, thousands of us, marched to support. Everything is in there. Everything is in there. And I think way more important than community engagement division that is part of APD is an independent public oversight body that can hold APD and individual officers responsible and accountable for what they do. If there is no public oversight independent of APD, then I think anything else that will happen within APD has it's not really an improvement. There's no progress. I refer you again back to Black Asheville demands. That includes inviting Black Asheville to the table to make sure that they have a voice in any budget discussions that regard their lives as well as our lives. Thank you.
Thank you.
Emma Hutchins. Thank you.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, my name is Michaela. I've lived in Asheville for about 8 years now. I'm calling in specifically to something David Zach said about having a community outreach division to hear the voices of the community. I believe that the community has made their voice loud and clear over the past couple of weeks. And that outreach is only a way for them to pick and choose who they get to hear from and who they decide what they want to respond. I believe that they should take the will of the people that has been made obvious. And along with that, when he says that APD officers knelt in support of protesters, it was a hollow move designed to try and pacify people when they meant nothing behind it. They gassed at everyone a couple hours after that, and they had gassed people before it. It was theatrics. It was propaganda, and it is unacceptable for that to be an excuse for the good work they did during the protest. And I have the other sentiments said tonight, and will reiterate, we need to defund the police, and as well as a quick thank you to Mr. Hayes for putting in the agenda to disallow chemical weapons on protesters. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. This is Dee Williams. I am somebody who's a native of Asheville, and I am an African-American woman. And the burden of my work for over the last 3 years, I know we've had a lot of influx of different individuals, and this is democracy, and it should be a lot of voices at the table. But our job here in Asheville, as far as my work has been concerned, whether it's been with the Asheville branch of the NAACP, Ban the Box, written consent to search, has been to save Black lives. I have not heard a lot of Black folk calling in. One of the things that I have been doing, and it has been a work in progress as a democracy calls for, it has been years, the research that we put into written consent to search, and we did get automobiles and we got homes. Now, if you want to take it beyond that, we don't even have data yet to substantiate or see where we are on on automobiles. We have some of it by quarter since the previous chief left, but not enough with this chief here. Let me say this, and I want to just admonish everyone that you guys are people just like they are. This, to lead people, is very difficult. And to all of the personal attacks that I've heard coming forth, is something that the Black community here in Asheville is civilized enough to know that that doesn't get anything done. And after all, I just want to also make another side note. There are a lot of white voices that have just come in. There are those of us who've been here for years, and our voices have not been nearly as resounding. So I want to say that the Black ministers and other folks in this community that I work with, including other Black activists and civic leaders, want to work with the Asheville Police Department. And let me just say that the plan, the 8 Can't Wait plan, is one that we're interested in pursuing. We're looking at how public housing can be policed differently. We're looking at school resource officers, and we're using data to back up everything that we do. I am so happy that I called in, and I want to say this. Anybody that makes a categorical statement about folks having to resign, that is not the way you get things done, not in a democracy. The truth is always somewhere in the absolute middle. And so instead of us just being such absolutists, Black folks, let me tell you this, nobody speaks for the Black community in Asheville. I don't either. And so for me to hear a bunch of people calling in who it seems that have usurped the narrative, and I don't say that lightly, allyship is to be commended, but this is our fight. And this is about saving Black lives. That's the way it started out. So I just want to thank City Council. Chief Zach, welcome to Asheville. I look forward to working with you. Manager Campbell, hold your head up. Let me tell you, we are rooting for you. Gwen, we are rooting for you. Brian and Councilwoman Smith, we absolutely are as well. So just please understand that this is a difficult situation. We're willing to work through it. And I have invited Chief Zach to meet with the Black Ministerial Alliance that represents pretty much all of the Black ministers in town and other people. So we look forward to it.
Dave.
This is our fight. Thank you. Bye now.
Bye.
Hello, can you all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Awesome, thank you. My first comment is just for the 7th question for the round with police chief regarding warnings around tear gas usage. I was at most of the protests where tear gas were issued, and unless he's referring to warnings of tear gas to the officers, there was no warning to any protesters or anyone present. All we heard was the tear gas go off and us trying to breathe, even though it was very, very difficult. So that's a lie. There was no warnings used at all. And then regarding the Sunday night situation where armed members of the KKK and other far-right organizations showed up, again, I was present and I saw what happened. There were 2 bike cops that showed up and talked very, very briefly to those with guns, never asked to see their permits, really didn't even seem like they were that concerned. And then within probably 5-10 minutes of them showing up, they biked off into the night, never to be seen again. When police chief says that they're understaffed and not able to be present, with a $30 million budget, it really seems like we need to hire someone that really knows how to use their funds to make that staffable, because with $30 million, I think you can probably have enough people to show up for something like that, especially if you're supposed to protect and serve the people of this community, which he absolutely did not. Additionally, there were 2 cop cars parked about a block away with their lights off the entire situation. They never got out of their car, which we knew they were sitting in their car, and they never came forth. So the idea that they simply couldn't handle the situation is a complete fallacy, and they should be reprimanded for that. Because if we're supposed to trust the police, supposedly, then how can we do so when we see them with our own eyes just completely lying to us? Lastly, the 8th question about a police officer being set on fire, I'd really like to hear more details about that, because it's nowhere on the news. And really, I don't think anybody has heard of that except for this evening. So thank you so much for your time, and I really hope we can get some clarity out of this whole situation. Thank you.
Thank you.
I am a resident of Asheville. I would like to make just one comment on a very specific instance. On Sunday afternoon during the Justice for Jerry Williams rally, Jerry's mother, Najia Avery, and other members of his family participated in a ritual where they put their footprints in poured concrete. This ritual was supposed to represent steps forward taken by Jerry's family, steps forward to move on and forward with their lives after having Jerry be murdered by APD officer Tyler Radford, who to this point has completely evaded accountability for his actions. So then on Monday, there is video footage of APD members forcibly destroying these concrete footprints. So that's what I'm calling to mention and to call attention to, and to call you out, Chief Zach, for. If there was, for some reason, perhaps lack of permit, I don't know what excuse you would make, but some reason for this concrete not being able to stay on the sidewalk there, you could have maybe moved it gently to another location and kept it intact, instead of several officers forcibly destroying these symbolic steps forward that Jerry Williams' family is trying to take after so much pain and suffering. So I would call you to think about that and to think about those actions. That's it.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Council. My name is Victoria, and I am from Asheville. I'm calling to make a few statements. First off, regarding most of these first ones are off Chief Zach's speech from today. We do not want the continued building upon of existing programs that are within the police department. We want the police defunded, and we want those funds reallocated into independent organizations that focus on public health and public safety. We don't want the police having any say or control in those being built or maintained. Chief Zach mentioned that officers were being given wide discretion to use force, and that is precisely the issue. We need people, not police, that are trained in nonviolent response methods. I am a student of the World Beyond War classes, and there are plenty of statistic evidence showing that nonviolent de-escalation tactics being used in actual war zones with other soldiers and military personnel, and it works. If we can do nonviolent de-escalation tactics in war zones, I think we can do that at a peaceful protest. Chief Zach, if you can't answer to how you will respond next time, how can we trust that you are going to respond any differently than you did? You know, it's funny that he cited concern with guns being carried by protesters, but there's photographic evidence and response that shows otherwise. It shows the police officers laughing and joking with these people with guns. And none of the incident that caused APD to use force throughout the protest involved guns. My friend, who was one of the few standing in front of the police line, the second day of protest, had no weapons. She was 3 yards away and received a fractured skull from a tear gas canister. You say you didn't arrest the protesters with the guns because you were afraid to escalate things, and none of what you're saying is lining up here. So getting a water bottle thrown at you warrants force, but literally people carrying guns illegally against city ordinance warrants no immediate response? That makes absolutely no sense. You also claim issuing a warning before using force, and a few people have said that didn't happen. I was there for almost every protest, and I was in the front. There was a warning sent out, but it was sent out using a megaphone. And when you have that many people crowded together and chanting, only the people in the very front are going to hear that warning. Nobody behind us heard that warning, guaranteed. So I would like to say that somebody said, okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yes, you're on the line.
Hi, this is Sarah Terry again. I called earlier. I'm a resident of North Asheville. I would like to second the notion of a lot of commenters, or I guess third or fourth or however many, to continue the push to defund the police by 50%. My biggest concern is, again, the actions of the police do not match the words of the police chief. And while I do trust that they do try to do their jobs with due diligence every day, they have to recognize that the community does not perceive them as keepers of the peace. Now, I'm not going to place blame anywhere there because a lot of the fault of that is due to the society we work in, and there's a lot of work ahead for all of us. But I really urge Chief Zach to really think about where the police, the APD in our city and also nationwide police as a whole, where they fit into our white supremacist society. Whether we like to think of it that way or not, that's what it is. You study history, it's right there in front of you. I would like to put forward maybe considering officers being screened going forward for any association with white nationalist groups and the KKK. I think that's an important step. It's important to notice that the APD seems to be more effective at de-escalation with armed KKK or white nationalist groups, armed white folks in the street, scaring community members, but they're not seemingly as trained with de-escalation when it's a peaceful protest about Black lives. And whether those situations are taken separate or together, I think it's important to compare the response to two. While the police may not think, well, this was done on purpose, the community they're meant to serve sees the police meet white men with guns with civility, but tear gas to those who are protesting police brutality. That's important to look at. I think police should be given mandatory anti-racist training. Again, that's the work of all white folks going forward, and that's going to be a lifelong commitment for every white American. But I think it's important for the people who are supposed to protect and serve all Americans to really engage with their own internal biases and work to not take those to a job where they can literally take someone's life. They don't have the trust of the Asheville community, and I really urge Chief Zach and his officers to look at their response to the community and ask themselves why the community does not trust them. We can sit here and talk about he said, she said, what happened. The internal investigations are already suspect. I urge them again to bring in more outside resources when investigating officers, and that's my time. But I just urge everyone going forward to really think about their actions.
Thank you, Sarah. Your time is up. Thank you for calling.
Hey, can you guys hear me? What?
Yes.
You can hear me? Okay. It kept telling me it's my turn. My name is Chris O'Leary. I'm a resident of Asheville. I I wish that I could say that I'm surprised by officers' failure to enforce the no open carry statute during recent protests. But honestly, it's the kind of exclusionary justice and blatant negligence I have come to expect from the Asheville Police Department. Public trust is at an all-time low, and yet by any measurable standard, it's business as usual. This brings me to the 30, 60, 90-day plan, which, let's be honest, is window dressing at best. De-escalation training and, quote, warning before shooting will not change racial profiling or the fact that our Black population are 3 times more likely to be searched by APD officers. Police violence does not spring from a lack of boundaries, but by a system that diminishes the lives of those being policed. To suggest any real equality can be achieved within this structure is to admit a very limited understanding of how racism works and the role police have historically played in subjugating people of color. We as a culture have outgrown law enforcement's bully tactics and will not stand for anything less than reducing the police budget by 50%. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I've been a resident here since the 80s, and over the years, I've seen countless instances of racism and sexism perpetrated by white male police officers. I've witnessed and experienced the police presence in underprivileged and majority Black communities, which manages to be both invasive and yet ineffective. Today, I would like to talk about what happened when my Black daughter wanted to support her community by exercising her right to protest. My daughter and I were standing in the sidewalk in front of Vance Monument peacefully chanting. A group of activists walked up Patton and gathered in the intersection. Without any warning, an officer threw an explosive device directly at peaceful protesters who were on the sidewalk. This flashbang grenade hit my daughter's leg. I've seen no improvement in the racist policies of APD over the years when a Black 15-year-old cannot even stand on a sidewalk and peacefully protest, as is her constitutional right. We do not need a community engagement department. We've heard the community loud and clear. Defund Asheville's local gangs. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Andrew. I am a resident of Asheville, or have been a resident of Asheville for the past 2 years. I think the only things I want to say are just commending all of the people who have called in so far, who have so considerately thought out all of these sentiments, all of these emotions, all of these logistics and facts that are being presented to you. And I just want to implore the council people here to act with urgency. Truly, do not be victims to bureaucracy or red tape in this process. Lives are on the line, and that's what the thoughts and actions need to be grounded in. Get creative. Your votes are coming up in the coming months, but get creative, act now. Defund the police, listen to the community. You know what they want, you know what they're saying. They've been saying it for weeks, months, years. So just please act with the urgency that you are hearing over the course of these phone calls. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Hi, this is Rob Thomas here. I have to rephrase my whole line. Thank you. So I'm a Black man here in Asheville. I'm an Asheville native as well. And there's a few things that I want to speak to. I don't really have too much confidence in there will be consequences for the actions that happen as far as, protesters being gassed and things of that nature? Because, you know, I've studied y'all's policies as well. You know, you have a lot of gray areas and loopholes, such as the wording, if necessary, or if needed, or unless. It provides loopholes and gray areas for law enforcement to be able to wiggle out of. And until we come together and work to change some of these policies and remove some of these gray areas and some of this wiggle room that they have, we won't be able to really hold them accountable. The interim chief, Robert White, told me something that has stuck with me for a very long time since I've been in this position. He stated that 98% of the things that law enforcement does is legal. The real question that we must ask as people is, was it necessary? And so that's what needs to be looked at after the fact. Because, you know, I've seen the footage. I know what I feel is unnecessary, and I can also look at it and see the same loopholes and gray areas that will be used. You know, that 98% rule, right? What's going to happen is they're going to find a couple instances, probably one instance where they're going to say, okay, that right there was out of regulation, but mostly everything else will be deemed legal. And honestly, the chief won't even have power to enforce any type of consequences, because the unions would be able to back the officer if the officer wanted to file suit against the consequences implemented. A lot of what's going on is bigger than local government, such as body cam footage. You know, city council members can't even access it, and there's been lobbying going on for years. So this is a huge issue, whereas we really don't even have the power to hold them accountable. They are a serious force to be dealt with. And I mean, the chief himself only has so much power to hold them accountable, whereas he has to go by the rules and regulations that are instituted inside the policy itself. You know, I don't have any faith in changing the culture of police. To change the culture of the police, you would have to change the culture of America. American culture is deeply rooted in racism. It's pumped in individual citizens every day through media and plenty of other platforms. You know, if you wanted to change the culture of policing overnight, live stream body cam footage, I promise you it would change. But that's not even a possibility right now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Hi, my name is Patrick Tonin. First, I want to thank members of this committee for taking the lead on launching an independent investigation into APD's response to protests in our city. Chief Zach has promised accountability and transparency from our police department, and this is just the first of many necessary steps. I want to call this committee's attention to Chief Zach's recent comments that APD has been underreporting use of force incidents. This revelation is incredibly frustrating, especially considering how APD has cited these same numbers as evidence that de-escalation and the revised use of force policy were showing positive change in the department. It turns out that Chief Zach came to the same conclusion as many in our community. The numbers they report are simply not believable. We need answers as to how these numbers were underreported, how long the issue has been occurring, and why it was never addressed by previous chiefs. As this committee is well aware, we've had similar issues with the city's traffic stop reports and related data, not to mention the policies that Councilwoman Smith mentioned that we have still not implemented after several years. We need this committee to push APD to maintain the basic levels of transparency and accountability that they've promised our city. And I encourage our council to consider this when we're trying to reimagine public safety in our city. If we can't trust APD to provide accurate information, then we need to do something else. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can y'all hear me?
Yes, you're live.
Hi. My name is Cassidy Doyle, and I'm a resident of Arden. I attended several of the Black Lives Matter protests here in Asheville at the beginning of the month. I really would like to have been able to go to more, but that choice was taken away from me by the Asheville police. While I was standing peacefully with my hands in the air about 10 feet away from the police line, I was shot in the face with an unknown projectile. I know for a fact that this did not come from behind me where the other protesters were, as I was facing the police line and wearing a bike helmet. At point blank range, an officer of the so-called law shot me in the face. I was taken by an ambulance to spend the night in the hospital because they fractured my skull. There was bleeding and air bubbles in my skull, and I needed stitches for multiple lacerations. It is now 24 days later, and I am still suffering from this injury daily. After the incident, I did some reading about how police are instructed in handling crowds, and I learned that any kind of crowd dispersal tactic is intended to be aimed at the ground to avoid causing injury to the people within the crowd. I also learned that had I not been wearing shatterproof goggles that cracked, by the way, I very legitimately could have lost my eye or even my life at the hands of an officer. There is plenty of evidence showing all of the reasons to support the idea of defunding and abolishing the police, and why funding alternative programs does more to benefit the community. I am asking this city to do more for the people by supporting those in need and showing that we care. Thank you for listening. We're beyond reform, and it is time to defund. Zach and Esther, please resign.
Thank
That
you.
concludes our hour of public comment.
Okay, with that concluding our public comment, do either of the committee members wish to say anything at this point?
Brian, can we just make sure that the answers to the Public Safety Committee questions get publicized in the, relative to this meeting, as well as we received transcribed public comment from earlier emails. Can we just make sure that those also get publicized so that people recognize that we were able to get those comments before the meeting started?
Vice Mayor, this is Deborah. I will make sure that that happens later on this evening.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Shanika, you have anything?
I really wish there was some way that we could create a hotline or some way for people who were injured to report their injuries. It doesn't feel good hearing about people who were critically injured during a protest and not able to report those injuries. So, I would love to see that happen in a few days so that people are able to call in and report those injuries.
Well, I think hopefully, Shanika, in the answers to those questions, there was information about how to report the incidents. And so I would urge the public to, I think it was the second to the last question, maybe the third to the last question, where Chief Zach outlined how to report those incidents. So, that's at least a step in that.
Yeah, and I'd like to see a part of our due diligence to take that out of that PowerPoint so it can be accessible, more accessible.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Gwen. It is item number 6. And we will highlight that when we provide the summary of the questions.
And I would like to just address an earlier caller that mentioned that some folks were afraid to make go to APD to make a complaint, fearing retribution. I would suggest that any folks feeling like that contact the city, do what Gwen was just talking about, contact council members. Anyone out there with pertinent information that needs to be part of this investigation needs to contact someone and let us get you on the list to be heard. I just got a text moments ago from folks that were part of the medic tents who have been waiting on someone to call them to be interviewed, and they have yet to get any contact. So I just encourage people to keep trying. If you have something important to pertinent first-hand information, we want to know about it. So please get in touch. And if no one else has anything else, we will adjourn.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Bye.